First of all, thank you very much for joining. This will be a quick hands-on introduction to Auth0. By no means it means I will cover all the aspects because they are numerous and a lot of ground to cover, but it will be a gentle introduction to the main concepts of Auth0, which hopefully will help you to get started if you are not already using this technology. So for today's agenda, I will do an introduction. We will see a couple of use cases for Auth0. We will explore some core concepts. Then we will jump to a practical example. Then we will recap a little bit to clarify some stuff, and then questions that you may have. Big disclaimer, I'm not an Auth0 expert. I've just used it in some projects, and I think it's a good technology that suits a couple of scenarios and that can really accelerate a lot the development of any application that requires some degree of security. So let's get started. So what is Auth0? Auth0 is a service which offers a flexible solution to add authentication and authorization services to our applications. It will cover anything from logging in and doing role-based access control, all that stuff, mainly authorization and authentication. It reduces the cost and time of development for these, which are kind of commodity services, right? All the applications require some degree of authentication and authorization. And this offers us a pre-built solution that is really flexible and easy to use. One of the big features and pros from Auth0 is the developer experience. Their support is super friendly. They have really good documentation. The documentation is built into the application, as we will see in a minute, and you can get up and running in minutes, not hours, because they offer these quick starts for the main technologies, and if you are logged in, the quick start even already has your configuration, so it's just a matter of really copying and pasting. Some of the users, so far so good. Any question? Feel free to jump in and interrupt me if you have any question, guys. Okay, so a couple of use cases for this service is, as I said before, adding user authentication and authorization with username and password, with social accounts, doing federated enterprise directory services such as SAML and WS Fed. This allows employees to access internal third-party applications using their enterprise credentials. For example, if your company has anything like any identity provider like Okta or those or Active Directory, they offer solutions that allow you to use that to authenticate your users. It also allows to easily securing an API with Auth 2.0. If you have ever had to do Auth flows from scratch, you know how difficult it is and the lot of things that you need to have into account. It also allows you to access securely this API that you before secure with Auth from any mobile or front-end apps. They have a bunch of SDKs for the technologies most used. This is, I don't know, Ruby, Node, Python, Java. React Native, if we jump into particular frameworks or libraries, React Native, Vue, Angular, and whatnot. And also allows to easily implementing single sign-on for several different apps. So if you want to have like a centralized way to authenticate an array of different applications, this allows you to do that. As I said before, it supports SAML, which is an enterprise standard for authorizing applications. It also allows you to implement one-time codes for logging in, aka passwordless sign up. It automatically will invalidate compromised user credentials. They are constantly checking with OWASP and other security directories regarding any possible service that is compromised. And then they will alert the user saying, look, this credential is compromised, please change it. And it does that right off the bat without doing any particular configuration. It also blocks suspicious IP addresses to avoid things like denial of service attacks. It provides user and password management. This is if you need to create manually one user for your application, you can do that. If you need to reset the password, it allows you to do that easily as well. So all the back office, you don't need to implement it in your application. You already get it for free from Auth0. They also offer compliance fulfillment. So if you need to comply any security standard because you are going to sell online service with your application, or for example, if you are certain standards of security are required and they provide that for free with almost no configuration. And they also provide certain degree of analytics for tracking particular users. Any questions so far? One thing that I want to emphasize here is that they offer a free tier that you can get started, and that free tier includes a trial of the pro features. And then you have a developer tier and a developer pro tier that are really cheap, considering that is an enterprise grade service. And then they have an enterprise tier, pricing tier, which can be a little bit expensive, but considering the cost of development and maintenance of these use cases, sometimes it's even cheaper to pay something like, if we are talking about applications with thousands of users, you will pay something like 30 cents per user per month, right? Which in an enterprise application is not really expensive, and you forget about all this, which otherwise takes time, and we all know that the expensive thing in software development is time, right? So I will introduce you to the core concepts on Auth0, and then we will see these concepts in a practical way in the example. So when you sign up for your Auth0 account, you have your Auth account in which you will pay for certain for the services, right? So anything that you do consume from Auth0 will be charged particularly in your account, and you can have more than one account if necessary, right? The first time you sign up with Auth0, they will require you to create a tenant. They include the tenancy concept right off the bat. So what is a tenant? The best way to think about tenancy, at least for me, the analogy that I like, for me, a tenant is a user database, or a tenant has a user database. So let's say you have two different applications, one for final users that will use, let's say, a mobile application, and then you have a maintenance application, and the scope of work of those types of users is completely different. You will create two tenants, one for the consumer app and one for the admins or the internal user, right? It's also, you will also use a tenant for each environment that you have. So let's say you have a development environment with all the applications, whether front end, back end, that those will use a single tenant, and then for production you will have a different tenant. And you can have as many tenants as you want in your account. I'm sure there are certain limits, like you cannot have 1,000 tenants, but the limits are very, very rational, right? It's very reasonable what they impose. So what you see here is my main tenant on my account. As you can see, I'm on the free tier right here, and I have this tenant that is the tenant in which my user will live, right? As you can see, you can create another tenant. I won't do that now. And you can switch tenants. So whatever you see on your dashboard it pertains to the tenant, right? Questions? Okay. The second concept we saw so far, we have an account, and that account has tenants that serve like user databases, so to speak. It's just an analogy, but it helps you to decide when you should create a tenant or not. Then within each tenant, you have applications. Applications, as the name says, are your applications. You have different types of applications. For example, front-end applications. This is single-page applications. Machine-to-machine that are just back-end applications. And they also have the concept of mobile applications, and I think they call it the standard applications. These are the applications that have a server-side generated front end. As you can see here in my tenant, I have several applications. I have one front end, which is a single page application with certain details that we will see in a minute. And I mentioned a minute ago that the support, the documentation is really, really good. So as you can see, this application has a client ID, a client secret, and a whole bunch of different configurations. If you go to Quick Start, they ask you, okay, which technology are you using? And you can search here for different technologies. They list the main front-end technologies here. So you say, for example, React. The example that we will see in a minute is React. And as you can see, you have here like the tutorial to start using this application with React. And it even has your configurations. You will see here, for example, this is my client ID, this is my domain, all the configuration details, they are already in line in the quick start. So you just have to copy, paste, and these examples, I tried several of them, really work right off the bat. So in that sense, it's really easy to get started, and you get instant satisfaction with this documentation, which is the best I've seen in this type of services. So when you create an application, they will ask which type of application it is. They will provide a client ID and a client secret. The domain for this application is something that we will see in a minute, but it comes from the tenant. So all the applications that you have in one tenant are going to share the domain. If you use a developer professional account, you can use your own domain, but otherwise they offer a hosted version on their own domain, right? And as you can see here, the name of my tenant matches the subdomain of this URL that they provide. When I created this front-end application, they require a couple of things. One is allowed callback URLs. We will see in a minute what this is for. Also allowed logout URLs, allowed web origins, and allowed course. This is domains from which you can call to the Auth0 API. And then some other stuff like how the tokens for these applications are generated. You can have rotating tokens for more security or not, since this is just for demo purposes. I made them not rotating, but they offer the service of rotating the signing keys for you from for free. They do this automatically. You don't need to care about that. And then the other concept important to start working with Auth0 is the concept of APIs. So think of an API like a REST API on your service, a REST API that you are developing. It doesn't have to be REST, right? But in this example will be. And when you create an API, you need to provide things. You get an ID and an identifier for the API, and they will provide for you this. How do I explain? When you create an API, you can authorize that API to talk to your machine-to-machine applications. So for example, here I have my web backend authorized for this particular API. And we will see in a minute how this works. So far we have our tenants. On our tenants, we have front-end applications, machine-to-machine that are just backend applications, and APIs that help you to authorize something. Usually when you use JSON Web Tokens, you send a token that is valid to do certain thing. And those things, you define it in the API. As you can see here on my web API, I define just one scope for the auth flow, which is read private. And it's just to validate or to allow permission to read from a private endpoint. And you can define as many as you want and call them whatever you want, right? And then when you add your backend application to your API, you also see which APIs. Right now I click it there, but I went from the API to my application, right? And as you can see here, I've authorized from this machine-to-machine application to talk to my API. So you can authenticate on the backend your calls to your web API. This concept of API and machine-to-machine application go hand on hand, right? Questions so far? Cool. Okay, so let me see. Oh, and they also, one more thing that I almost forgot. They provide this universal login, which is the URL that I displayed before, right? They have this page that you can customize if you want with your branding colors, your logo, or you can even like completely customize the look and feel, putting your own HTML. And this allows to have a hosted login page on their domain, which is super secure, to enter credentials or use external identity providers such as Google, Facebook, or whatnot. So that being said, as you can see, I put White Prompts logo here and some of the branding colors to make it more similar to our web page, right? To have a branded experience. So with all that concepts out of the way, let's jump to some practical example. What we will be seeing, as you saw, I have a front-end application created, a back-end application with an API also created. And what we will do is call this backend from the API from a front end, right? A pretty basic example, but it helps to illustrate how easy it is to integrate with this service. So this is our demo application. I'm running it locally here, but it's online, and I will put the demo website in the YouTube recording comments, notes, I mean. And as you can see, it's a React application. And what I'm doing here is just showing the internal state of the app. It will have several steps. First, we will log in with our user credentials. I will use Google as identity provider. Then I will get an access token from this front end. I will get an access token to talk to the API, and then I will call the API authenticating with this access token that I just got, and then we will log out, and we will exercise the full flow that I just showed. The front end initiates the login, which happens on the universal login page. The user enter valid credentials, and then it's sent back to the callback URL that you configure here. Let me show you. When you create a single page application, one of the configuration settings is the callback URL. As you can see, I have my local host here. So it's sent back with the token in the query param, right? Back to the front end. And in that way, you can consume that token with the Auth0 SDK. Then with that token, that ID token that you get, you can request an access token for a particular audience. The audience is like the identifier of the API. Here, I will show you. This is the identifier that we will be using, even if I'm running in, this is like an ID, it's not the real URL, although it should match, right? I'm running this in my local host, so the URL for the backend will be different, but it doesn't matter. It will be successfully identified as this API. And then once you get the access token, you can send a request, sending in the authorization header that access token, and then the backend will verify, the backend will verify that access token against Auth0. It's actually not a real call to the Auth0's endpoints. It's just a cryptographic verification that the JSON web token that you receive in here, the access token generated, was actually generated by Auth0 and is not a forged one, right? So we get the validity of the token and the user scopes that are all signed in the JSON web token, and then in this way we can verify that the request is valid and we can send the request. So I will do the full flow and then we will jump into the code, right? So I'm going to log in here. As you can see in the URL, I'm in the Auth0 universal login page. And as you can see, it's pretty good. One thing here, notice this. In this case, it's alerting me that the dev keys that I'm using are test dev keys, right? It's not an actual API, and that's fine. But this same alert you get when, for example, one thing like a token, I mean, not a token, a private key is compromised or anything like that, you get this type of alerts, sometimes more preeminent. Like, for example, in here, saying something like, you cannot log in because this site is compromised, alert the administrator in the worst case scenario. So I'm going to continue with Google. Are you guys fine? Any questions so far? No? Okay.
I have one, but just to share with the others.
Yeah.
I know the answer, so. So you have two different tokens from Auth0, right? Access token and ID token, I think is the other one.
Exactly. And you have a third one, which is refresh token in the case you want to refresh a credential without having to log in again.
Okay. What is the correct one to be used in a front-end application? Let's say the one you are using it.
Right. In the front-end application, you should use the ID token, which actually contains your identity. That is why it's called ID token. Right. But then if you are authorizing with those credentials, you are authorizing something else, you should use the access token. By something else, it will be the API that I created. In this case, I will use the access token to talk to this. But for example, the Auth0 management API is also accessed with the access token. So if, for example, a user, you are storing in the database, in the user database, you are storing custom field, custom attributes, and you want to update them, you will use the access token.
Okay. So whenever I can, I should use ID token, right?
Yeah, unless you are not, the access token is when you authorize this application to do things on behalf of the user. In that case, you create the access token. For example, here I'm authenticating my front-end app, right? But then I will talk to the backend app. So I'm authorizing a front-end user to talk to another API. In that case, I use the access token.
Okay, I got it. Cool. Thank you.
I don't know if you had a different opinion on that, because I mean, there is no single answer to that.
No, I mean, it's, I think that you answer right. It's, both of them works, right? Sometimes it's hard to understand when to use one or the other.
Both tokens are valid JSON Web Tokens.
Exactly. Okay, yeah, I'm talking about my experience with Olive. They complain about the ID token, whatever, because we use the access token, remember?
Yeah. And they wanted the ID token instead.
Right, but I never couldn't explain the reason. So, okay, just to share with the others.
Okay, cool. And if you want, guys, we can like validate one of these tokens in the JSON Web Token debugger to see the contents of the token. So I will use this identity that redirects me back to actually it redirects back to Auth0, and Auth0 in turn redirects back to your application. And here you can see the state of the application. I have something called Auth0 context. I will show in a minute how it's implemented. And it tells me about the authentication state of the user. This is if I'm authenticated or not, if it's loading, doing an asynchronous call for some reason. And then it tells me the user identity, and it says my given name, all the things that they got actually from Google, right? And then with this, let me put here the console here. We are going to check the network. I get the access token. As you can see, this is done silently by the SDK. In some cases, it takes a little bit more because it needs to verify with Auth0. In this case, I was just signed in, and it can generate the access token on your behalf right away. And then I will fetch this private API of my backend, and I will show in a minute how is implemented the authentication, right? And you can see here I hit the API, which is on my local host, and as you can see here, I send the access token that I got from the SDK to the backend. And I will, let me see, I will go to the JSON Web Token debugger just to see what is on that token. Here. And as you can see here, I already knew this. You configure that when you create the applications with signing algorithm you want. The type of token, which is a JSON Web Token, and then in the payload you see the same things that you are seeing here, the user details, right? For example, that the audiences for this are this is the what is the name? The Auth0 user management API. If you want to change something about the user in Auth0, like some of the attributes, or if you want, and then of course the audience of your API, your identifier. Remember when I showed the API, we have an identifier. Well, here it is. So when you authorize a new API, when you get the access token, you are going to get the audience added in here. And then when it is issued the token, when it expires, and the different scopes that it allows. And you can see here the token, the scope that I created, like read :private, is here. So let's see a little bit of the code. I won't do live coding because I don't think it is worthy. I didn't do much here actually to get this working. Literally, I just used their quick start and I could implement this right away. So let's start with the front end. As you can see here, I'm using the Auth0 React package here, and I'm using a component from that package, which is called Auth0 Provider, which provides the different configurations for the application. And this is literally what you saw when I showed the quick start. I'm getting this from the .env file, as you can see, but those are the details that you just saw. I'm just adding the endpoint for the backend here. And then I use that component to wrap my application so the application has access to the Auth0 context in any place. And then in my application, I'm using from the same package the use Auth0 hook, in which you get the Auth0 context for free. Let me show you here. Basically, this part of the application state is what I get from the hook. And then just a couple of simple use state hooks for the access token and the private data here, which I'm just printing in the screening here. Basically, what this part of the JSON is this part. And I get the buttons here. To do the login, when I click this and I went to the universal login page from Auth0, I use one method from the hook, which is login with redirect. There are different flavors for the login in case you want to have the user input the username and password in the same app and you don't want to use the hosted UI, you have a method for that. The simplest and easiest to integrate is the login with redirect. Then to get the access token, I implemented a very, very simple method here that actually calls a method from the hook, which is get access token silently. There are also different options for different flows. And here you need to send the audience for the access token that you want to generate and the scope. So in that way, Auth0 is going to verify that you as a user have access to those scopes, and if the API actually has permissions to read those scopes. And then I just set that in the user state hook. And then to get the private data, I just do a request to my backend URL, putting the access token that I got from the hook in the authorization header. Are you guys with me? Any question? No? Cool. Then let's jump to the backend that I like a little bit more. I know very, very little about React, so even a noob like me could do this. So it's really, the developer experience is great. For the backend, what I did is a simple serverless application. As you can see, let me show you the configuration file here. As you can see, I have a public endpoint that I'm not using at all, just to put something public. And then a private endpoint. And then, as you can see, I'm putting an authorizer, a serverless authorizer, to that particular endpoint, which is the auth function that I define here. And let's see how that function is defined. So the auth function is a serverless authorizer. Basically, when you send an authorization token, it will include it in the handler event. So if there is no authorization token, I just call an authorizer because you don't have that token. Then I split from the header, I split the token part, the token value, right? And then if I don't see that my header is a bearer token, I just also call an authorizer. Then I apply the auth domain and the auth audience to the as option, and then I just call the verify token to actually validate that token that I'm receiving is a valid one. And for the JWT verify method, you pass the token value. the client public key, and then these options. What I'm checking is that I'm receiving the correct issuer, the correct audience. And if that's not the case, I just call unauthorized. And if that's the case, I call generate policy. One comment regarding the client public key. Let me show you how do I get this. I have it set as what's the name? An environmental variable, but then a special one. As you can see here in my environment declaration, I'm actually reading a file. And the good thing about this signing key, these public keys, is that you can download them. As long as you are not using rotating signing keys, this signing key, this public key will be valid to validate the token, and you can download it before actually doing the verification of the JSON web token. Hold on one second. I want to show you. You can download these keys. I will stop trying to guess. No, it's not this one, sorry. Bear with me 1 second, guys. I just want to show you. Bear with me 1 second. Yes, this domain. And then you can get your signing keys here. You will get the current one and the next one if you are using rotating, or you can even download it. I think it's from here. Yeah, here. And these are just public keys that you can use freely to validate any token generated for this particular tenant, which maps to one particular domain, right? So basically, I'm downloading that public key and reading it from the file system when I start the backend. I have a console log somewhere in the backend. Let me show you here when I'm invoking the auth authorizer. What I'm doing is actually validating that token and printing out the event. And I will do one more request here. Here you can see the event that I got, in which you get several things, among those the authorization token that I used to validate, then my private key, which is no surprise, I have that in the file system, and then the decoded JSON web token, which maps with what you just saw in the JSON web token debugger. So that's it for the demo, guys. Please, let's jump to the questions and let's see if I can answer, because as I said, I'm not an expert, just used this service for a past project, and I thought that is really useful. So any questions you guys have? No? Well, then a takeaway from this.
Sorry, I can try if you want. Just one question.
Yeah, sure.
Let's say that you don't need login with different apps like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. I don't know. Google. Would you still use Auth0 or you will use JWT? WT? Jason
Good,
Walters, right?
good question. If I was to just have a very, very simple app with no much load and not much exposure, I will use my own implementation, I think. But if I was going to use any social logins like Facebook or Google, or if the site is actually under pressure, that I mean, it has a lot of exposure and you want to be 100% sure that you are not going to get hacked, I will use a service like Auth0. I will just say the takeaway that I want you guys to take from this talk, and then I will add something to that response, Mariano. So we just implemented the full cycle of implementing our Auth cycle, Auth flow from scratch in very, very little time. To do this, it took me probably less than 1 hour. It took me more actually to deploy this in production than actually developing it. So I worked more on the configuration and the setup of the project than actually coding, right? For a very, very basic implementation again. So that is so great. Any the pros, we saw really good support, friendly developer experience, and a really fully featured service. Any cons? Yes, I have one that I want you guys to keep in mind. The developer account, the paid developer tier and the developer pro tier, which is the one next, are cheapish. They are not really expensive for a service. And they will try to hook you to use one of the paid features, like, for example, having your own domain on Auth0, or I don't know, having enhanced logs. And then it's something like $23 per month. You say, okay, that's not a problem, you pay. When you get into the developer tier or the developer pro tier, you get a quota of 1,000 access token, not tokens in general. Those can be access token or machine-to-machine tokens, right? And 1,000 sounds like a lot. Of course, if you are starting paying for those tokens, you need to make sure that you cache the tokens and you don't generate the token anytime you want to authenticate one API with the other, in order to avoid regenerating tokens for each and every request. But those tokens will increase exponentially with the amount of applications that you are authenticating. So, for example, you have a microservice, let's say, with two different APIs, right? Two different services and two applications, one web and one backend. And let's say you have the standard user will authenticate on each client, the mobile and the web, and it will generate one token for one of the of each microservices APIs, right? There you have, and let's say that token will be valid for 1 week, which is more or less the standard time that these tokens last. Usually is, or by default, you get 1 full week of validity of the tokens. So you will have 4 tokens issued for every user. If you add one more API, that doesn't increase it linear, but exponential, multiplying the amount of clients by the amount of APIs those clients talk to, right? So you need to be mindful of that, because once you surpass the 1,000 token limit that the developer pro account has, they will try to sell you the enterprise account. And that is, I wouldn't say crazy expensive, but it's expensive. So you need to really be mindful about the amount of tokens that you generate. As with anything good, if you are good at something, you shouldn't do it for free, the Joker said, right? So they are really good at identity management, and they charge for it. So to complete the response for Mariano's question, for a simple, very simple service with just username and password, and if I'm able to use Cognito, I would use Cognito. So this is a good technology to be used in big applications with a lot of exposure, with being mindful about the amount of tokens that you generate. And if it is a really small application with few users, let's say just a back office for an internal service, you can use it really without worrying too much. But if you are going to have like 1,000 users concurrently generating tokens and a lot of different APIs that you are validating with those tokens, then you need to think about price. As I said, the enterprise tier will be something like between 25 and 30, 40 cents of a dollar per user per. But if you have, I don't know, let's say 10,000 users, it's like a lot, right? Let's say $4,000, which again, for an enterprise service, let's say you are developing for this amount of users of a paid application, then it's not a lot, because the time that will take to maintain your own authentication solution wouldn't worth the cost. I mean, 4,000 users is the standard wage of a developer, and you probably, with this amount of users, are going to have like a lot of work to maintain, not to mention the risk of being hacked or anything like that. In any case, there are cheaper alternatives that do the same, like AWS Cognito. The big con of Cognito against Auth0 is the user friendliness, right? Cognito is a little bit more involved to configure and maintain. So I think that as we all know, AWS documentation is not great. Auth0's documentation, yes, is super. So that is for the presentation, guys. If you have any other question, feel free to shoot. Nope? Okay, so that will be it. I will upload the recording as usual and publish it in the channel as soon as possible. And thank you so much for attending to the talk, guys. Very much appreciated. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.